Welcome to Wealth and Means, advice dressed up like hard work.
Each week, we explore ideas that help you pause, reflect, and think more deeply about the opportunities all around you.
It's the perfect mix. A little information, a few stats, some real-world insights, and just enough deep talk to make you feel smarter before your second cup of coffee.
Today's episode is stacked. What you didn't see in the news on Minecraft is prestige TV, fan-made hype outpacing studios, cloud gaming drifting towards subscriptions, and the strange corners of attention where podcasts, fandoms, and momentum stocks quietly win. Wake up ready so you know exactly which inflation reads, central bank signals, and energy data could turn a calm calendar into a full market repricing. A knowledge bomb on how long-term wealth actually gets built with indexes, ETFs, and patience, not predictions. A humor me detour into the frugal saint versus the pampered sinner, emergency funds that mysteriously turn into wallets, and the jokes no budget spreadsheet survives. And we land it all with Let's Invent Again, the story of the Wright brothers, two builders who proved that control beats hype, and whose fundamentals first mindset still shapes how the modern world moves.
A quick thank you to our sponsor, Nost Moments at nostmoments.io. Share your most precious memories. Share the Nost Moments. All right, let's roll into what you didn't see in the news. The stuff that didn't make the crawl at the bottom of the screen, but absolutely explains where attention, culture, and money are quietly drifting. Let me start somewhere that looks harmless, blocky even, and then quietly flips how we think about entertainment. This week, some of the most engaged storytelling on the internet didn't come from Hollywood or streaming platforms. It came from Minecraft, not as a game, but as a stage. Finales like Grian's Nice Life and cinematic survival stories like My Best Friend Died on the Unstable SMP aren't just people playing. They're serialized dramas with arcs, alliances, betrayal, and payoff. The important thing here isn't the view count, it's the behavior. Audiences are showing up episode after episode the same way they do for TV. The implication is simple and a little uncomfortable for traditional media. YouTube creators using sandbox games are building long-form IP with almost no overhead, and the audience is fully trained to treat it like prestige television.
And the production budgets are basically time and imagination.
That same shift shows up in fan culture. A so-called final trailer concept for Stranger Things, totally unofficial, pulled massive views this week. And here's the key detail. People weren't confused. They knew it wasn't real. They just didn't care. Fan edits have become part of the anticipation cycle itself, filling the gaps between official releases with content that feels cinematic enough to scratch the itch. The implication is that studios don't fully control hype anymore. Fans are now co-producers of excitement, keeping franchises alive between drops, and doing it for free. Meanwhile, cloud gaming is bubbling back up, not because of some revolutionary tech leap, but because of timing. Holiday deals, upgrade fatigue, and renewed chatter around Nvidia and Capcom have people asking a different question than they used to. Not, does it look good? But, do I need to own anything at all? The implication here is subtle but big. Gaming is sliding toward the same access-first model music and film already went through. Hardware still matters, but distribution, latency, and subscriptions may matter more. Zooming out, fandom itself is changing shape. Global hashtag events tied to entertainment brands are pulling people together across time zones, while sports conversations like the rising chatter around Travis Head aren't exploding in volume so much as deepening in engagement. Fewer posts, more replies. The key fact is density. The implication is that attention isn't just about being loud anymore. It's about being sticky. Communities that talk with each other outperform ones that just broadcast. That preference for connection also explains why conversational podcasts surged this week. Shows like Amy Poehler's Good Hang and Kylie Kelsey's Not Gonna Lie aren't reinventing the format. They're winning because they feel human. Celebrity adjacent, sure, but informal, self-aware, and comfortable. The key detail is that follows are rising faster than episode counts. The implication? In an overcrowded audio market, trust beats novelty. People don't want more content. They want familiar voices they wouldn't mind sitting next to on a long drive.
Turns out charisma is still undefeated.
Then there's the outlier that reminds us why stories still matter. Blink, the neurological survival story of Jake Hendel, landed among the most shared episodes anywhere this week. It's intense. It's not easy listening, and people shared it anyway. The key fact is, emotional weight didn't slow it down, it accelerated it. The implication is that audiences aren't avoiding hard stories, they're avoiding empty ones. And finally, the market side alley, the small cap tape. Names like Ondas Holdings, Mimi, VMAR, DVLT, ASST, all lit up with massive percentage moves and eye-watering share volume. Not leaders by dollar value, but magnets for attention. The key thing that pulled eyes this week wasn't fundamentals so much as momentum, press releases, social chatter, and the classic speculative feedback loop. The implication is familiar to anyone who's watched retail flows before. This is the lottery ticket band of the market, where velocity matters more than gravity, and price can move long before conviction ever shows up.
High speed, low certainty, handle with care.
That's what you didn't see in the news this week. Not the loudest stories, but the ones quietly teaching us how attention, culture, and capital are rearranging themselves in real time. Now, let's wake up ready, because this is one of those weeks where the calendar quietly turns into a market stress test. We start Monday with a bit of a split-screen day. Early clean energy investors have their eyes on NextEra's investor conference in New York. The big question there isn't whether renewables are the future. We're past that. It's whether grid upgrades and project timelines are accelerating fast enough to justify current valuations. If guidance leans confident, clean energy stocks could catch a second wind. Later in the afternoon, inflation expectations hit. This isn't the CPI headline everyone argues about on cable news. It's what consumers think inflation will be years from now. If those expectations keep creeping up, the Fed gets less room to relax, and bond yields tend to remind everyone who's really in charge. Tuesday takes us global before lunch. Australia's central bank is expected to hold rates, but the real story is the tone. Are they done tightening or just pausing with a finger still on the trigger? That matters more than it sounds, because Australia sits at the crossroads of commodities, energy exports, and China demand. Back in the US, small business optimism drops midday. This one quietly tells you whether hiring, tech services, and local growth are thawing or freezing. Sprinkle in a full slate of energy and finance conferences, and Tuesday becomes a day where individual stocks move on guidance whispers rather than macro fireworks. Wednesday is the main event, the heavyweight bout. We get China inflation overnight, which sets the tone for global commodity demand. Then Canada weighs in with its own rate call. But everything funnels into 2 p.m. Eastern when the Fed takes the stage. The question isn't just cut or no cut. It's what the dot plot says about next year and whether Powell sounds confident or cautious. Tech valuations, energy financing, and risk appetite all hinge on those few pages of projections. By late afternoon, oil traders pile in for the weekly inventory numbers because nothing says inflation reality check like barrels, gasoline, and refinery runs. Thursday keeps the pressure on with producer prices. This is inflation at the factory gate, the stuff that eventually shows up in margins, layoffs, or price hikes. If PPI stays hot, markets start questioning how fast rates can really come down. Trade data follows, giving us a read on energy imports and tech exports. And by late afternoon, natural gas storage hits, a key pulse check for utilities, LNG exporters, and anyone betting on winter demand. Friday is quieter on paper, but deceptively important. Final European inflation numbers confirm whether price pressures are actually easing overseas, while the U.S. rig count tells us if drillers are stepping on the gas or tapping the brakes. Weeks like this often end not with fireworks, but with positioning. Who believes the Fed, who doesn't, and who's already looking ahead to the next data drop? The bottom line? This is a week where policy, inflation, and energy all talk to each other. If the Fed sounds confident and inflation cooperates, risk assets breathe easier. If not, the market's reminder will be swift. That's the setup, and now you're awake, caffeinated, and ready.
All right, knowledge bomb time, because this is one of those ideas that sounds boring until you realize it quietly explains how most long-term wealth actually gets built. Start with indexes. An index is not a fund. It's not a product. It's a scoreboard. It's just a list of securities plus a rule book. The S&P 500, 500 of the largest U.S. companies. The Russell 2000, 2,000 smaller U.S. companies. The MSCI World, over 1,000 large and mid-sized companies across developed countries. These indexes don't take your money. They don't make bets, and they don't try to be clever. They just measure how a slice of the economy is doing. Most big indexes are market cap weighted, which means the biggest companies matter the most. A trillion-dollar tech giant moves the S&P 500 a lot more than a small industrial firm. There are equal weight versions where everyone gets the same vote, but the idea stays the same: rules, not opinions. That's why we have so many indexes: big companies, small companies, U.S., global, sectors, because investors want different yardsticks to answer simple questions like, how did the market do? Now here's where it turns from a scoreboard into real money. An index fund is the bridge. It's a mutual fund or ETF that simply owns the same stocks in the same proportions as the index. If the S&P 500 is up 9%, a good S&P 500 index fund is up about 9% minus a tiny fee. That's passive investing. No stock picking, no predictions, just match the market. Compare that with active funds, where managers try to beat the index. The awkward truth is that over long periods, most of them don't. S&P's own SPIVA scorecards show that across decades, a majority of active U.S. large-cap funds underperform the S&P 500. Not because the managers are dumb, but because fees, friction, and competition add up. Beating the market turns out to be really hard when the market includes everyone else trying to beat it too. Let's put real numbers on this. Over very long stretches, the S&P 500 has delivered roughly high single-digit real returns after inflation. Over the last couple of decades, closer to low double digits nominal. And here's the part people underestimate. If you put $100 into an S&P 500 index fund at the start of 2008, right before the financial crisis, that $100 quietly grew into roughly $650 by the end of 2025, assuming dividends were reinvested. That period includes the financial crisis, the euro debt scare, multiple sell-offs, COVID, and a full bear market. No heroics, no timing, just staying put. Small caps tell a similar story, just with a bumpier ride. The Russell 2000 has delivered solid long-term returns, but it gets hit harder in recessions and rebounds harder in recoveries. Globally, the MSCI World shows that even with wars, political chaos, and constant crises, broad developed markets have historically compounded wealth over decades. This is where the stories matter. Imagine someone who started investing in early 2008, about as bad as timing gets. If they panicked and sold at the bottom, the outcome is brutal. But if they stayed invested in an index fund and reinvested dividends, the math eventually did the work. Or picture the truly boring investor who just puts the same amount into an index fund every month for 30 or 40 years. No genius, no hot tips, just consistency. That's how ordinary contributions quietly turn into hundreds of thousands or even millions over time. There's even a real-world bet that played out in public. In 2006, Warren Buffett wagered that a simple, low-cost S&P 500 index fund would beat a basket of hedge funds over 10 years. It did, by a mile. His point wasn't that professionals are useless. It was that costs matter, and over time, the humble index often wins by not trying to be flashy. So what do index funds actually do for you? First, instant diversification. One purchase gives you exposure to hundreds or thousands of companies. One blow-up barely registers. Second, low costs. Expense ratios measured in hundredths of a percent instead of whole percentages mean more of the market's return stays in your pocket. Over decades, that difference can be enormous. And third, maybe most important, they help with behavior. Instead of asking, what stock should I buy right now, you ask, am I still following my plan this month? That shift alone keeps a lot of people invested through downturns instead of bailing at exactly the wrong moment. Index funds aren't magic. They fall in bear markets. They don't beat the market. They are the market minus a small fee. They can be top-heavy, especially in U.S. tech, and nobody knows if the next decade will look like the last one. But that uncertainty is the whole point. Owning indexes is a way of saying, I don't know which story wins, so I'll own them all. The simple playbook most long-term investors end up with is boring on purpose. Pick a core index, keep costs low, automate contributions, and maybe add small tilts around the edges if you want. You're not betting on brilliance. You're betting on the global economy continuing to grow over time. And that's the knowledge bomb. Over decades, broad stock indexes have turned simple, boring habits, regular investing, reinvested dividends, and staying put through chaos, into outcomes that beat inflation, outlast crises, and quietly outperform most professionals trying to do better.
You know, I'm up here every week preaching the gospel of financial responsibility. Track every dollar, avoid lifestyle creep, build that sacred emergency fund. 3 to 6 months of expenses tucked away in a high-yield account like a little financial fire extinguisher for your future self. Solid advice, boring advice, life-changing advice. But let me confess something, because transparency is cheaper than therapy. When I got my very first real bonus, like, wow, I guess I'm an adult now money, I did the responsible thing. I sat down, transferred $500 into a high-yield savings account, and even named it Emergency Fund. Capital E, capital F. Felt incredible. I strutted around like a personal finance influencer with 8 followers. And then, literally the next day, I walked past a store window. There it was, a designer wallet, glowing under museum-grade lighting, the kind of leather that whispers, you've made it, and also, you are bad at math. And I thought very calmly, very rationally, you know what? I work hard. I just funded my emergency fund. I deserve this. $800 later, I'm holding a wallet so luxurious it probably has its own accountant. A wallet. An object whose entire job is to hold the money I'm supposedly saving. The irony was thicker than the leather.
So the emergency was your old wallet having low self-esteem.
Exactly. It was emotionally distressed. I acted quickly. And don't think this was a one-time lapse. Oh no. This is the same person who will drive 15 minutes out of the way to save 3 cents per gallon on gas, doing Olympic-level mental math to confirm I'm saving a heroic 48 cents on a full tank. The same woman who treats couponing like an extreme sport. Digital coupons, paper coupons, stacking offers, timing toothpaste sales like I'm preparing for a recession and the apocalypse. Yet the moment something shiny whispers, treat yourself, my frugality vanishes like it was never real. That barely started emergency fund? Suddenly it's the YOLO fund. A microscopic scratch on my phone? Clearly an emergency. Can't risk unreliable technology when I need to. Check my high-yield savings balance. We all live this double life, right? By day, we're frugal monks, reusing tea bags, packing sad desk lunches, bragging about how we don't even pay for TV anymore. By night, we're secret spenders, dropping hundreds on gadgets, skincare, takeout, or that one investment piece of clothing we swear we'll wear forever. Spoiler, it lives in the closet with the tags on.
Somewhere in America, a budget spreadsheet just flinched.
Here's the relief part and the real talk. This doesn't make us failures. It makes us human. The goal isn't to become a joyless spreadsheet robot who never spends a dime on anything fun. The goal is balance. Save aggressively, yes. Build the emergency fund, absolutely. But also leave room intentionally to enjoy your money without guilt or sabotage. Think of it as giving your inner frugal saint a scheduled spa day. Plan the pampering. Budget for the treat. That way it doesn't have to stage a midnight coup against your emergency fund. Because if we go full deprivation mode, we're going to rebel eventually, and that rebellion usually costs $800 and comes in Italian leather. So laugh at the hypocrisy. It means you're alive. Just try to make the rebellion a line item in the budget next time, not a surprise attack on your future self. And hey, if anyone needs a gently used designer wallet, hit me up, pristine condition, still has the tags.
And now for the greater debate. The debate that should happen, but almost never does. Usually because someone storms out, someone else threatens to move to a cabin in the woods, and everybody agrees never to talk about retirement at Thanksgiving again. But here, fueled by imagination, caffeine, and the faint scent of amortization schedules in the air, we make it happen anyway. Tonight's showdown is deceptively simple. the kind of topic that could fit on a motivational mug if the mug were actively trying to sabotage your 401k strategy. Is early retirement the ultimate path to freedom, or a detour away from meaning? In the left corner, representing the save 70%, bike everywhere, escape the corporate treadmill, and live like freedom is a skill philosophy, Mr. Money Mustache, Pete Adney. And in the right corner, championing find purpose, build mastery, contribute to something larger, and don't abandon the team before your character arc pays off, Adam Grant. Let's begin. Pete steps forward with the calm swagger of a man who has built a life around needing almost nothing. He smiles, a minimalist smile, the kind that has no interest in lifestyle inflation, and begins softly. Most people aren't tired from work, he says. They're tired from paying for the things that force them to keep working. Bigger houses, shinier cars, the slow bleed of subscription boxes that turn self-care into a monthly invoice. You don't gain freedom by earning more. You gain it by needing less. Every dollar you don't spend becomes a tiny worker buying back minutes of your future life. Cut consumption, raise savings, and suddenly the world opens. Simple, vast, breathable. The audience leans in. Pete's thesis lands like a pressure release valve no one knew they were holding. Then Adam Grant steps to the lectern with the warm precision of someone who can turn a psychological insight into a plot twist. He respects the math, he says, truly. But life is not a spreadsheet, and meaning does not compound like an index fund. People thrive when they're part of something larger than themselves. Work, good work, shapes identity, builds mastery, gives contribution a home. You can bicycle away from stress, he says, nodding toward Pete with a grin. But you cannot bicycle away from purpose. It's the first clean hit of the night. The crowd reacts, soft gasps, tight nods. This will be a fight. Pete smiles unshaken. Purpose, he replies, doesn't require payroll. Purpose requires time. Time you only get when you stop trading your life energy for a leather-trimmed SUV loan that impresses exactly 0 people whose opinions matter. He tightens the point. Fire isn't about refusing to work. It's about refusing to be trapped. Grant steps forward again, eyes bright, voice steady. You're assuming work is inherently draining, he says, but it isn't. Bad work is draining, bureaucratic, pointless, mismanaged work deserves early retirement. But meaningful work, the kind that challenges you, connects you, shapes you, that's not something to escape. It's something to grow into. That line lands like a dart. Pete counters with a gentle ferocity. He loves working, he says, building, teaching, making things with his hands, but he wants to choose those things, not be obligated to them by financial dependence. The room murmurs. Point to Mustache. Grant absorbs the blow and pivots. Most people don't become happier when they detach from structured contribution, he argues. They become lonely, untethered. Humans are tribal. We build meaning with others. Remove that structure and many struggle to build anything at all. It's a clean counterstrike, one that resonates in the silence that follows. Pete returns fire. Maybe the struggle isn't natural, he says. Maybe it's cultural. Maybe people only fall apart outside of work because they've been trained to worship the 40-hour week like scripture. Once people stop working, they start discovering who they are. Once they stop consuming, they start noticing what matters. The line crackles with electricity. Someone in the audience exhales like they've just been dunked in cold water. Grant raises the stakes. What about legacy? What about the 35-year-old engineer who steps away from a field hungry for their talent? Society loses decades of innovation, mentorship, leadership. Freedom for one can be a loss for many. It's his swing for the fences moment. Pete doesn't dodge. He steps straight into the blow and counters with a punch that makes the room gasp. How many great ideas never happen, he asks, because people are too busy preparing Monday's PowerPoint deck? Give people back their time, and they create things. Open source tools, gardens, businesses, art, inventions. A life designed around freedom often contributes more than one designed around job titles. The audience trembles with divided loyalties. Two truths collide like symbols. Grant acknowledges the accuracy of Pete's vision, then presses the other side of the blade. Not everyone blooms in freedom, he says. Some bloom in structure. The danger of fire is treating autonomy as a moral ideal, overshadowing the value of those who stay, who build, who mentor, who raise the next generation of engineers, nurses, founders, teachers. The point lands softly but deeply. Pete acknowledges his own weak flank. Not everyone can live the fire lifestyle. Income inequality, family obligations, unexpected shocks, these make extreme saving inaccessible for many. He isn't prescribing early retirement. He's prescribing the ability to choose a life not dictated by consumption. The tension resolves into something richer, two philosophies circling each other, not to destroy but to illuminate. Grant moves to close with gentleness, edged by conviction. Meaning is the oxygen of a rich life, he says. Freedom without meaning becomes drift. Work, good work, keeps us anchored to contribution. It keeps us connected to humanity. Pete delivers his final quiet strike. Freedom is the soil from which meaning grows, he says. A life without autonomy can look productive on the outside and hollow on the inside. Freedom is not the enemy of meaning. It is the space in which meaning is chosen rather than assigned. I step forward, letting the lights dim just a bit, holding the energy between them. Two visions stand before us, freedom and fulfillment, less opposites than twin aspirations wrestling inside the same human heart. Whether you're saving 70% of your income or pouring decades into a craft that lights your brain on fire, the destination isn't retirement, early or otherwise. It's a life that feels chosen, a life that feels lived, not endured. And maybe the real punchline is this: you don't need to choose sides. You only need to choose a life that doesn't feel like an accident. The lights fall, the debate lingers, and that is the greater debate.
Before Silicon Valley worshipped garages, before founders put iterate on hoodies, there were two brothers in Dayton, Ohio, quietly running a bicycle shop and teaching themselves how to solve a problem that had embarrassed humanity for centuries. Orville and Wilbur Wright didn't look like revolutionaries. They weren't credentialed physicists. They didn't have government grants or industrial patrons. What they had was a radical hunch that everyone else was getting flight wrong. Let's invent again with the Wright brothers. At the turn of the 20th century, most would-be aviators believed flight was a brute force problem. Strap a big enough engine onto a flimsy frame and muscle your way into the air. The Wright brothers looked at those wrecks and saw something else entirely. Birds didn't overpower the sky, they balanced inside it. Flight, they realized, wasn't about power, it was about control. That insight reframed everything. Instead of starting with engines, they started with gliders. Instead of trusting textbooks, they trusted measurement. In the back of their bicycle shop, surrounded by chains and spokes, they built a wind tunnel and quietly proved that much of the accepted science of lift was wrong. They tested hundreds of wing shapes, not because it looked impressive, but because they needed the data. This was engineering stripped of romance and ego. Test, measure, adjust, repeat. And then came the breakthrough that changed the world. 3-axis control, pitch, roll, yaw. Not abstract concepts, but a practical system that allowed a human to steer an aircraft the way a cyclist steers a bike. Subtly, continuously, instinctively. Wing warping for roll, a forward elevator for pitch, a rear rudder for yaw. Suddenly, powered flight wasn't a stunt. It was something you could manage. On December 17, 1903, at Kitty Hawk, Orville lay prone on a wooden frame, hands on controls that had never existed before, and stayed in the air for 12 seconds. The longest flight that day lasted 59 seconds. By modern standards, it was nothing. By human standards, it was everything. For the first time, a machine lifted itself off the ground under its own power, stayed aloft, and landed where its pilot intended. The world didn't immediately applaud. European papers dismissed them as bluffers. Even in the U.S., skepticism lingered. But the Wrights did what great builders always do. They ignored the noise and kept iterating. By 1905, they were flying for nearly 40 minutes. By 1908, public demonstrations in France and America erased all doubt. Governments paid attention, militaries followed. Aviation went from curiosity to inevitability almost overnight. The impact was explosive. Transportation collapsed in scale. What once took weeks by ship took hours by air. Global trade didn't just speed up, it reorganized itself. Supply chains became international by default. Diplomacy became personal. Families spread across continents and stayed connected. An entirely new industry emerged, employing millions and reshaping economies in ways the bicycle shop could never have imagined. War changed too. The airplane entered history with a hopeful myth that seeing the battlefield from above would make conflict unthinkable. Instead, it rewrote strategy: reconnaissance, air superiority, deterrence. Aviation became a decisive force, and Orville Wright would later reflect on that duality, comparing his invention to fire, indispensable, dangerous, and morally neutral in the hands that wield it. What's remarkable is how little of that story feels distant today. Every modern aircraft, from a wide-body jet to a hobbyist drone, still obeys the logic the Wright brothers proved out with wood, wire, and patience. Pitch, roll, yaw. Control first, power second. That mindset echoes loudly in today's aerospace frontier. Look at electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles, the flying taxis promising to unclog cities. They feel futuristic, but philosophically they're pure Wright brothers. New propulsion layered onto old aerodynamic truths. Or look at autonomous flight, where software now manages the same axes Orville once handled by hand. The frontier isn't whether machines can fly, it's whether they can fly safely, efficiently, and at scale without us on board. Even the sustainability push feels familiar. Hydrogen aircraft, sustainable aviation fuels, quieter supersonic travel. This is another Kitty Hawk moment, a period where the fundamentals are being rethought under pressure. The constraints are different, the stakes are planetary, but the method is the same. Experiment relentlessly, distrust assumptions, let reality, not theory, have the final word. And that may be the Wright brothers' most modern lesson. They weren't anti-education. They were anti-unearned certainty. They proved that being outside the establishment doesn't mean being unscientific, and that the most dangerous phrase in innovation is, everyone knows. In an age obsessed with moonshots and hype cycles, their legacy is almost contrarian. Progress comes from small tests, stubborn curiosity, and an almost unfashionable respect for fundamentals. The first flight lasted less than a minute. The consequences are still unfolding. That's it for another episode of Wealth and Means, advice dressed up like hard work.
We hope you enjoyed the full arc. From internet culture that looks like noise but acts like signal, to the macro data that quietly moves markets. From the unsexy mechanics of building long-term wealth to the very human tug-of-war between frugality and indulgence, and from a spirited debate about freedom and meaning all the way back to first principles, where a wind tunnel, a bicycle shop, and a belief in fundamentals still show us how progress really compounds.
Subscribe, rate, and share this episode. It helps more than you think.
We do this for you, to help you have a better week, a sharper mind, and maybe even a longer attention span.
And a special thanks to our sponsor, Nost Moments, because the best investments are still your memories.
Until next time, stay curious.
Stay kind.
And keep compounding.